In this video, we're going to begin adding fastening details to our plastic housing. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to carry on designing our plastic housing, but this time we want to begin to add the fastening details. If we bring back our section view, we know that we have to add some openings for things like the connectors, the USB-C, and if we want to account for things like the reset switch and the quick connector, then we need to make openings for those as well. But at this stage, I think it's important that we figure out how to hold the circuit board and how to bolt or attach the housings together. So we're going to worry about those openings in a little bit. We're not going to worry too much about them because those can be simple cuts through the side as long as we be mindful of the draft direction. But the fastening features can be a little bit more difficult. Remember, we do still have this piece here that we named base remainder. And if we take a look at that, this was a flat plane or a flat face that had the curve on the outside that we eventually used to create our bottom housing. So that piece still exists in the design, and we still have the original PCB that we moved around that did have the holes that are used to actually hold the PCB, but you'll note that it is a little bit different in thickness. The final PCB is a little bit thicker, and we should account for that. So I did mention very early on that there are different ways in which we can hold things together. We can use snap latches, we can glue parts together if they're going to be permanent assemble, but in some cases, we might want to get creative with how we hold things like circuit boards. For this design, what I want to do is I want to locate the circuit board on the bottom of the housing, but then I want to use features on the top to hold it in place. So I don't want to screw it in place. I want to simplify the assembly process. But I want to use, again, I just want to use something simple. So we're going to be focusing on the bottom housing. Let's turn off our section analysis. And really, I don't need to see the actual circuit board because I have the PCB here that we used to sort of design or lay out the housing. You'll note that there are some sections of the PCB in the corner that are hitting, and that's okay because in this case, we're designing the PCB. We could go back and we could make those corners a little bit tighter and get that out, or we could make adjustments to the actual PCB since we're the ones designing it. So sometimes we have that flexibility and it does help. In this case, I'm not going to worry about the corner so much, again, because we could control that. And I think that the rounded edges of the housing are going to be more beneficial. So as we look at this, we have a flat face, this PCB solid body that we use. I'm going to rotate this so it fits in the screen a little bit better. And we've got the openings, the holes. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll simply want to just put a boss on the bottom and we'll screw it on. Now that works pretty well, but we also have to be careful of the location of components if we have enough room for the head of a screw, or potentially just the time it takes, the time involved to assemble this. What I want to do is I actually want to come in and I want to get a little creative with how we can hold this together. So I want to select the bottom face of this PCB and I want to design a standoff that I can use to locate the PCB. And then we're going to use the top housing pressing down on it to hold it in place as well. Now remember on the original design, the one from Hammond, they used the boss in the corner and it had a little rest for the PCB. I think I'm going to do that as well. It's a really clever way to hold the board so we can have a little piece come out in both directions just for some additional support. What we could do is we could put those on both the bottom and the top housing if we can actually extend the plastic down that far. We'll have to see. But for right now, let's go ahead and get started creating a sketch. The sketch is going to be on the bottom face, but so we have to hold down the left mouse button and select the other face. It's going to be the bottom of that PCB. Now that we've done that, we can actually hide the PCB because the entire profile comes in with that sketch. So now that we have this in place, what are we going to do to create some sort of pedestal or pad that can hold this? We have to be mindful of the thickness of any plastic that we create. So if we use inspect and measure, the diameter of this hole is 2.5 millimeters, which means we can't simply just make an extrusion here, a cylinder, because it's going to have too much plastic, especially if it's large enough to actually hold the bottom piece. So the way that I want to approach this is by using a center point rectangle. I need to find the middle of that hole, and you can see that can be kind of hard after the fact. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw this rectangle. I'm going to draw another one here. Then I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to find that. Notice that it put it on the corner. So that's obviously problematic. So we're going to hit Control Z. We're going to undo that. And I'm just going to hide the solid body. It should make it easier for us to see this. So you can see here, we also have some options to do things like show or hide profile. We can show projected geometry. But when we get onto those other tools, it can be difficult. So for us to easily see this, I'm going to go to point, and I'm going to place a point right at the center. That way, when we're using our rectangle tool, it's going to be easier for us. So once again, rectangle, center point, from that point we just put there, and I'm going to do the same thing in both directions. I am going to use my equal constraint for the thin side and for the long side, so it's easier for us to sort of design this. Then I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to begin dragging this in. So what we're doing here is we're creating some rib structure, something that we can have come up from the base that'll end up holding our PCB in place. And then we'll simply extend this out, the diameter of the hole, when we get to it. So we need to decide how thick this is going to be. So D on the keyboard for dimension. And remember, we created that value in wall thickness. So when we use that, that's going to determine how thick those pieces can be. So we could go smaller than that, but this is going to be sort of the starting point. And then we need to determine how wide they can be. Now that's really not a concern, but one thing that we should keep in mind is the wall of the bottom housing. If we want to carry that all the way over, then we need to bring it all the way out to the wall. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. We don't really need to do that for structure. It just adds an additional path for plastic to get to this. But we do need to be mindful of any traces or components on the bottom of the PCB. So that's always going to be a consideration that we need to think about. So for this example, I'm going to pick a value of 4 millimeters. So the hole itself is right here, and that'll give me enough material on all sides to hold the PCB. So I'm going to say escape, and I'm going to go to finish sketch, and then I'm going to extrude this. So we're going to pick extrude. I'm going to pick all of these sections. And I'm not going to include the little corners here because that's just part of that original hole. We're going to begin pulling this down, and I'm going to say to object. So I want to go all the way to the base. I want to go all the way down to that bottom piece. So I'm going to select the bottom housing as my object. I'm going to make sure that I draft this, so D for draft. And you'll notice that that goes outward automatically, and it is joining. We're going to say OK. And then we need to bring our sketch back. We're going to do extrude again, which is E on the keyboard, or you can select it here. And then we want to pick just those areas that are inside, and we're going to begin pulling them up. Now this time we want draft, but it's going to be negative, so minus D, and we're going to select our draft user parameter. And we want to come at least through the PCB. We want to come far enough inward. Now, we do also have to be mindful of the fact that this is a perfect fit. This is exactly matching the PCB hole. So if we want to account for things like manufacturing, then we need to do that. But the way that we are going to account for that is by using a chamfer on the upper edge. So we'll come to Modify, Chamfer, and we're going to select each of these upper edges. And we'll add, let's say 0.25. That'll taper those in. It'll make it a little bit easier for the PCB to snap onto there. So now we have our little feature that we can use to hold the PCB. That's in one location. And in that sketch, we have a second location here. So I'm going to go back to that sketch. I'm going to edit, and I'm going to create a sketch point at the other one up here. So I need to find where that hole is. And again, this can be kind of difficult, especially when the solid body is here. We know that it's up in this corner, and there it is right there. So now we have our second location. What we can do is we can create a copy of this. So we can use Modify, Move Copy. We can select the objects, grab everything here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a copy, and we're going to go point to point. So I'm going to select the center point as my origin, and this is my 2 point, create that copy, and say OK. So now you can see we've moved it completely over here, but you'll note that it is free to move about. We just need to move it and snap it to that point to make sure it's coincident. So then I'm going to finish my sketch. I'm going to bring back my bottom housing, and I'm going to go back to my original extrude feature, and I'm going to include these other sections, these other profiles. So I'm just going to grab all of these that I want to extrude down. Remember that they're automatically going to go to that object. They're automatically going to have the same amount of draft. We'll say okay. Then we'll fix the second extrude. And again, what we're going to do is just add those same areas that we want. It's going to come up. It's going to have the same amount of draft. And lastly, we're going to edit the chamfer. Now for this one, we actually have to hold down Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and then we added those chamfers. So sometimes when we're building out these little features, these little details, it can be helpful to just build one, make sure it works. And then if you have a sketch or a location, we can simply copy all of that work to another point or other points, whether it's through creating some sort of pattern, or if we want to, again, do a move copy with something like point to point. So now that we have those two features, let's bring back the PCB. Now I'm going to go back to my top level so that I'm unsuppressing everything. And you can see here that it doesn't go all the way through the PCB. So something that we could do is we could create this similar boss feature on the upper portion of the housing that could meet with it and also press on the circuit board. That's a little problematic simply because it has to go pretty far. You can see how it has to go quite a distance to make that work, and that's going to end up causing problems in manufacture. So what we're going to end up doing is probably bringing a feature off of the inside wall of the housing and coming down to the corner. But that's a good way for us to get started. And if we want to make any adjustments, for example, if we want to find that second to last extrude, all we need to do is edit that feature. And instead of -1 millimeter, I'll bring it up 2 millimeters. And now it comes up above the circuit board. So again, we've got those little chamfers on the corners to make it easier to put the circuit board on. But now it's positively located, at least in plane. We haven't held it down, we didn't screw it in place. But this simplifies assembly already because now we're not having to screw pieces together. We do still need to take care of the boss in the corner and the little pieces that are going to support the board. We could add those anywhere. We could add them from the sidewall, but if we already need a boss to screw the housing together, then it makes sense to just incorporate them there. I think that was a really clever design that Hammond did to make that work. But at this stage, let's go ahead and save our work. I'm going to make sure that we don't lose anything. And as we're starting to get into these like more bite-sized pieces of information, I'm going to break the videos up a little bit more. Rather than spending 30 or 40 minutes trying to follow along, I want to focus on one specific task. So at this point, I think that's going to be the end of this video. If you have any questions, obviously, please let me know through email or comments. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.